All right, we are, as usual, just starting maybe a minute or so early for today's live stream. And the title of today's video is going to be Who Will Pick Up the Pieces of Broken Government? And obviously we can go wherever your questions lead, but I usually I'm starting more often than not now, trying to start these with a question and at least dealing with that issue before we jump right in to the full-blown live stream. So thank you very much for watching. This is We the Govern, in case you don't know it. I don't have my usual bug that you would kind of see kind of on this side of the screen here for whatever reason. Don't know why it's not working. So we will just head right into the tonight's live stream. The one thing I'm going to point out, though, is that if you're going to ask questions, whether that's down below or on the side, depending on what type of device or your computer, whatever that looks like on your screen, just make sure, if you can, just to make it easier for me to see your question, just hit the @WeTheGoverned in the body of the question initially, just so it's a little bit easier for me to pick it up. A lot of times what happens, at least been my experience when we get, especially if you have a lot of traffic, the scrolling of all the different comments, which is great with each other, I just can't pick the questions out sometimes as easily, and I don't want to miss them as they're popping up on the channel. So that's just a way for me to quickly see it, and it stands out a little bit easier if you're asking a question. And if you want me to definitely get to what you're saying, please make sure you ask a question, not just make comments. Comments are great. Sometimes I'll pull those up, but mostly what happens is if I can't tell that it's a question, I'll just have to skip through it just to get to the questions that are down below. I did a video last week that did get a little bit of traffic, which was just one about 4 different examples of fraud in local government around Washington State, fairly recent, and had some feedback from that. And based on that feedback, I decided to produce another video this week, which I'll probably be launching tomorrow. That's my plan right now. Basically, showing additional cases of fraud and how you, as an active citizen who's maybe taken a Doge Washington training class or at least learned how to use the Public Records Act efficiently, how you'd be able to go in and catch those individuals that were caught stealing money or committing fraud or theft from government, just as so using examples and then showing what you would actually be looking for when you file your records request. And so I'm hoping that this will answer or respond anyway to some of the questions that people had last week on the last video that I did about those 4 fraud cases. And these are 3 new fraud cases. There's really no limit. I could do videos like this every single week. There's lots of cases of government fraud. And one of the things just to remember is that these are actually, these are just the ones that are dumb or sloppy enough to get caught. I think most cases of fraud probably go undetected, and really big, sophisticated fraud efforts in government probably, in particular, go undetected for decades or years. So the reality is, if you want to look for that kind of thing in government, there's a lot of places you can look, and you're pretty likely, if you have a little bit of patience and are methodical about it, you're going to find something at some point in time. And so I'm encouraging more and more people to be engaged in that way. I think that's an effective and practical use of your time and energy to expose fraud in government and to expose waste in government and to expose the problems in government, so that, and making that as public as we possibly can when we catch those people, so that both to discourage bad guys and also to reduce maybe just how much fraud and corruption is in government. It doesn't mean it's ever going to go away, but it's just that it'll help, I think, start the process of kind of cleaning things up. My last officially scheduled Doge Washington training class was last Thursday up in Clallam County. It was a good turnout. I believe there were about 80 people there, give or take. I haven't gone through the whole sign-in sheets yet, but it's around that number is what it looked like. A lot of good questions that were up there, a lot of good people, and I probably knew about 15% of the people who were there, so a lot of new people to meet as well. And thank you so much for coming if you were at that class. We had an earlier one that week as well, but right now I don't officially have any more Doge Washington training classes. I realize that if you live in Vancouver or the Clark County area, we are in a discussion about putting one together down here. For whatever reason, we just haven't picked the optimal venue or the time frame for that. And then if you're up in Bellingham, I know there's been some conversations up there as well about putting one together, and I am talking to some people in King County and possibly, I think, in Pierce again, possibly a different location than probably what I've done in the past. And I believe there's 2 different ones I'm looking at up in King County. We just haven't officially picked the date or the venue, so I'm not advertising it yet until I do that. I do have a number of different stories that I've been meaning to get to. There's a couple things I'm waiting on in my own records requests or record requests that other people are doing for me on a couple of stories that I would like to get out there as soon as I can get them public. So I'm really just waiting for a couple little pieces. You know, sometimes you just need that last little record to kind of put the nail in it and feel like it's good enough to go public with the story. There's a couple really good ones, I think, that are sitting out there. And inevitably, if you're doing what I do, you have dozens and dozens of these stories. Some of them fall off because as you investigate them, they aren't quite as good as you thought they were. Or there's some element of it that you can't verify enough that you're willing to go and do a public video about it or a story about it. And then there's other ones that as you dig into them, they're just a little less interesting, or frankly, sometimes they just get so complicated that it's very difficult to tell the story. And you just get caught up in having to do different stories as you move along. And sometimes that's how it works. So let's jump into just a couple of initial questions that are popping up because I find that if I don't start doing that right away, pretty soon I don't get caught up. So let's just jump into a couple of these first ones. And the first one here that I have is from Michael Case. What is your opinion on the story about the Department of Licensing handing data over to ICE? And is this just a ploy to get the public behind refusing to give them Washington voter rolls? And so here's the funny thing about this a little bit is you have a couple of different issues that are all intertwined together on this subject. And I've done several videos in the past on the Department of Licensing and the fact that they basically register non-U.S. citizens to vote in addition to giving driver's licenses on a daily basis. They've been doing it for decades in our state. So nobody can honestly say that they don't register non-U.S. citizens to vote in Washington. Every single employee that I've ever spoken to who worked there as a whistleblower who came to me, and that was their job on the front line, they admitted that it was essentially something that they did pretty much as a regular feature of their job, especially over the last maybe 5 to 10 years, a little bit more common. So, and remember, we knew about this 20 years ago when we were trying to get into jury summons rejection letters, people who were saying that I don't want to be on the jury because, and a perfect reason to not be on the jury is to say I'm not a U.S. citizen. And so we were, that used to be a public record that you could get. And so we were documenting that there were hundreds of these people who said they couldn't be on juries, couldn't serve on the jury because they were not U.S. citizens, and yet they were clearly on the voter rolls because that's what the jury pool is pulled from. So once we started exposing, I say we, I wasn't the one who was involved in that, but I was involved with some of the people who were. And once that was being exposed on a regular basis, what does the state do? Well, Washington State gets in there and they decide that should no longer be a public record. The last thing we want you to do is have any kind of transparency or honesty about what's actually going on. And so they cut that off from us and made it so it was no longer a public record, which I thought was interesting. So this has been going on a long time. There's nothing new about what the Department of Licensing is doing today. It could be that the Department of Licensing has just gotten more sloppy, or that they're, just because there's more non-U.S. citizens in the country, there could be, that's why we've seen a lot more of these cases and these stories. I've had many people who are here legally under H-1B visas come up and show me their ballots. People from China, people from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Belgium, Denmark. It's not unusual. It's so common, actually. It's almost silly to imagine that there's anybody who gets a driver's license in Washington and doesn't get registered, even if they explicitly say that they're not a U.S. citizen and it's against their will to do it. The Department of Licensing typically registers them to vote anyway. So the fact that the Department of Licensing would be handing the data over to ICE. It's not a ploy to get the public really behind refusing to give them the Washington State voter rolls. The Washington State voter rolls are not secret. These are public records. There's nothing secret about this. Every single person in America should be able to look at the voter rolls, not just in your state. You can look at the voter rolls in other states. It's really been more recently that some of the shadier operations out there, states that run a really slipshod operation, like Washington or Oregon or California or Colorado or Massachusetts or New York, Illinois, these states, that they suddenly have, as their problems are exposed, and as you look at some of the problems with their voter databases, that they've tried to become more opaque and less open about the voter rolls. And this is something that really goes back quite a ways. If you've ever studied the history of voter rolls in America, manipulating the voter rolls has been a favored way to commit vote fraud for generations, long before anybody watching this video was born, long before your great-grandparents were born. This has been a common way to manipulate the voter rolls. Tammany Hall used to do it, the Reconstruction South. This is a fairly common way of manipulating vote results. So it's a little absurd that we're going back to that earlier era, and in some of these states, usually states that the Democrats control and run, where they're trying to conceal and hide their voter rolls because they know they've registered non-U.S. citizens to vote. The Department of Licensing in Washington State is probably one of the worst agencies in America when it comes to this. I believe that we probably started with the motor voter registration here in 1993, doing it poorly and wrong from the beginning. Maybe they had some controls on them a little bit in the early 90s, but those have fallen by the wayside since then. So the fact that ICE is looking at those vote rolls is useful, but they're only probably doing it, and I don't remember, this is the whole thing in 2018 when Inslee fired the head of the Department of Licensing for cooperating under federal law, and tried to replace her with as corrupt a person as he could find in the state of Washington. And the Department of Licensing has become substantially less professional than its already low bar of being unprofessional was at that time. So at this point in time, for ICE to be getting those records, the Homeland Security is going to have those as well. And frankly, they have their own records that are probably substantially better than ours. One of the things about that executive order that has come up is obviously there's 19, I believe there's 19 states, Washington being one of them, that's litigating with the feds because they don't want to have the voter rolls be cleaned up, right? That they're hostile to any effort to potentially clean up the voter rolls and remove non-U.S. citizens from the voter rolls, plus all the other problems that have been uncovered over, especially in recent times. And so as they are trying to come up with any and every excuse they can use to not expose the truth about what's going on in the voter rolls, they're going to throw up whatever smokescreen they can possibly justify for why their voter rolls are garbage and not well maintained, or they're not doing a good job with them. And so the fact that Department of Licensing is going to get the hot seat to some extent is inevitable, but they brought it entirely on themselves. No different than the New York litigation that's going on right now for the same type of thing. I really think New York just imitated Washington. Same thing going on in California, same thing going on in Oregon. So, and Colorado, and all these other states that I mentioned. And so what would be nice is if Homeland Security could take their lists, even just of the non-U.S. citizens that are here legally, so they're on H-1B visas or some other legal visa status, so nobody's getting deported off this list, just make that list public so that we can see how many, the public can just crowdsource it and show how many of them are actually registered to vote. Frequently, and I'm going to add this in, against their will and against their consent, they are registered to vote all the time, every single time. It happens every day. And the slipshod, sloppy operation that's being run at Department of Licensing allows the bureaucracy to kind of get the bureaucratic two-step, right, which is basically where the Department of Licensing blames Secretary of State, Secretary of State blames Department of Licensing, they both blame VoteWA blames them, then they blame Eric for not actually doing the proper cleanup, and then they shift the blame to all this, the county auditors saying it's their fault, which is essentially what the handout that Secretary of State had right after the executive order here a couple months ago where they're basically reminding all the auditors, the 39 auditors that we have in our state, 38 auditors with the head of elections in King County being a unique title assigned to that job. But they've reminded him, hey, you guys are the registrar of record, right? You're the one that actually is responsible for the vote rolls. But the reality from a practical standpoint, the way that it's structured here is it's this combination of VoteWA's centralization of the voting records for the state of Washington, Secretary of State's responsibility for managing VoteWA to some extent, even though they do this all the time, and then Department of Licensing and DSHS and these other agencies that are essentially funneling registered voters in. If you ever meet an agency and take money from them in any capacity, WIC, food stamps, whatever, then they automatically are registering you to vote, usually a second time or a third time if you've already been registered to vote. They just keep registering you every time. Even if you say you don't want to be registered to vote, they register you anyway. And you get built into the system, and that creates fluffy, crufty, very poorly managed and poorly documented voter rolls, which allows non-U.S. citizens to be on the voter rolls. And if the Homeland Security could come out with that list, then we would see and be able to easily audit, I think, from a public standpoint anyway, or at least making a lot of publicity about it, the voter rolls that are not, that where we have clearly non-U.S. citizens in there. And this has been going on. Don't think it just started today or yesterday or during the Obama administration. It's been going on for quite a while. My dad had a client of his that was from Australia, and he lived in King County, and he was here on a work visa, been here for a long time, but he was very proud of the fact that he voted in Australia. And so he kept getting registered in King County to vote against his will. And my dad actually was an attorney and represented him to remove him from the voter rolls 3 times. I think it took 3 times, he said, before he finally got his friend removed from Washington state voter rolls, despite the fact that he'd already had court rulings removing them, forcing them to remove him, his friend, from the voting rolls time after time. And he was an Australian citizen, didn't want to be registered to vote. And King County kept registering him to vote anyway, against his will, every single time. So this is the problems that that the fundamental voter roll system itself really does represent. And the inevitable reality of having to go in there and clean up the rolls, it's really what that it's going to expose probably a lot of things that they don't want to see. We'll probably be talking about this a bit more next week, but I'm sure that, just to answer the question that Michael Case brought up here, I'm sure that there's some effort by the Democrats, at least the leadership anyway, in the state to try to say that, oh, this is such an invasion of our privacy or something like this. But frankly, the voter rolls are not the problem. Like, making those public they should be public. They're already public. They've been public even more than they are now. And the reality is there's nothing particularly nefarious about making them public. In fact, you want them to be as public as possible so that you can identify shady operations on the vote roll process. Jumping down here, Wayne Hartman, this is really not a question here. You just said that I understand it costs $25 million for a recount, and we were going to have a go to the federal level to bring charges against Ferguson. I'm assuming that's what you meant, and I don't know what that means other than you're arguing. I mean, obviously that's a pretty expensive cost, but the recount costs are expensive. And if you've ever I've been involved in a lot of different recounts before. Especially for one of the recounts that are really beneficial is to do a selective recount of precincts in certain jurisdictions, because it allows you to audit the batch counting system that they're using in Clear Ballot or whatever program that they have, and be able to verify those numbers are actually matching correctly. And I've been involved in a lot of these hand recounts when we've done that, and I think hand recounts should be done on a systematic and kind of randomized process on a regular basis, a large statistical sampling of a precinct level hand recounts, so that you can actually get a sense of the accuracy or any problems that the system's introducing it. And we've uncovered some problems doing it in the past. Nothing major, but we've uncovered some problems. And so I think that's an important thing. Let's see, Wayne Hartman, current ballot to allow Lacey to be able to form a Parks Commission, the ploy to allow the government to get more tax dollars. I would agree with you on that. Listen, here's the thing about structuring. What happens is you have a given jurisdiction, city or county, whatever it is. And originally, they create a parks division. Parks are just one thing. They do this in a number of different categories, but parks is a classic way. And so over time, as they become more bloated and incompetent and inefficient and ineffective with your tax dollars, that little piece that people want to have parks becomes an inconvenient part of the budget. And so the advantage that a county or a city has is by spinning that off into a separate taxing entity. Sometimes with a separate elected body, sometimes still under the county commissioners or the city council. It kind of depends on the structure. There's a couple different ways they can do it. But by spinning it off, it allows them to still keep the original tax dollars that city or that county was getting, and it allows them to create and spin off this entity over here without supplanting some of the funds that they already have within their budget. And so it's just simply a way to shift those expenses into a different category and then they can always blame them for how much they're increasing taxes. And it creates this another kind of monstrosity and bureaucracy to kind of run that entity over there. And it allows them to have a little bit more leeway with their current budget. And even if initially they'll claim, oh, we're going to distribute some percentage of our money into those parks, I mean, they eventually zero it out, and the separately elected entity ends up, or separately organized entity. Parks are the most classic thing, but it's not the only thing. You could have cemetery districts that are created simply for the same reason. You can have other types of kind of Olympia did this with the the arts district of some kind. I mean, this is just it's a cash grab scam that government puts together to shift out inconvenient elements of their budget into these other little pockets and let them become their own taxing entities so they can bloat and grow their own bureaucracy over there and not affect your main fiefdom over here, or at least reduce the amount of money that you have to dedicate to it so you can squander that money on other things. So that's typically how it does. Let's see, or how it operates, sorry. Jason Fisher, question, afternoon, Glenn. I hope you are staying cool. The permit to purchase going into effect 2027. Will Washington, like high school, wait last second to set up, causing potential freeze on gun purchases? So this is a good question. This is having to do with this completely illegal and totally unconstitutional permit to purchase concept that inevitably will be challenged in court and probably thrown out at some point in time. But unconstitutional activity is a common feature of at least the political leadership we have in Washington State. And so that's the kind of direction that they like to go down. But obviously kicking the can down the road and delaying it, this is actually pretty similar to what they did with what was the payroll tax that they implemented for a while ago. They're very unpopular. They kept kicking the can down the road to implement it just so that they could push it out further because, and of course, what your analysis is them waiting until the last minute to actually set up something to make that process work. Of course, that's what they're going to do. It's a willful effort on their part. They don't want to actually be able to do the job well. So, of course, they're going to wait until the very last minute. They'll screw it up, which government usually does. And then as they botch it and screw it up and make it worse and flounder around for a couple years on that, they don't care that it's making it hard for people to exercise their constitutional rights, assuming that it even still exists at that point in time. And it probably makes it easier to sue them and to prevail in a case like that, but they don't even care about that. It's not their money. It's probably going to be yours or some organization that you like. And anyway, we'll see. We'll just see how it goes. So that's just how the bureaucracy tends to roll. There's plenty of examples of that, actually, unfortunately. D.L. Williams got a question here. I just wanted to know, is there another witch hunt? And is Washington State involved? You're going to put some context into that, so I don't know what you're talking about there. D.L. Williams, you're going to have to get a little bit clearer with me. Tell me what you mean by another witch hunt. Do you mean at the federal level, state level, something else? I am not sure what you're referring to, so you'll have to be a little bit clearer in what that question actually means. Robert Parker, thank you for joining us. A great guy for public records out in Kitsap County. Thank you so much. It's not a question, but I figured I'd just call you out anyway. Thanks for joining us. And D.L. Williams, you obviously wanted to just test at We the Govern, but please let me know what you're referring to on the witch hunt, because I don't know what you're talking about. Teresa Hancock. Pat Kohler is the director of licensing. I'm assuming the Department of Licensing in Washington State. What is her position on this? I'm assuming you're asking about her position on ICE having access to the vote lists or voter rolls or the Department of Licensing data. And I don't know, but probably Pat Kohler would be fired from a job, just like Inslee fired the last person who dared to actually help support or at least follow federal law and give that information to the feds when they asked for it. So my guess is that if they have any objective or goal of being employed long term in government, they're going to probably not. They're going to come out at least say they don't want to provide that to the Department of Licensing, and they're not going to cooperate. That's what I would expect to some extent. Robert Parker, this is a good question here. Any benefit that you know of in having a hospital district? We have one quietly being pitched in Kitsap. And my answer to that is no. Presuming you actually want health care that's going to work and a hospital that'll still be there and doesn't squander millions and millions and tens of millions more dollars than necessary to go nowhere, I would say that I would not recommend putting in a special hospital district in your community. And this has been demonstrated. The bigger hospital districts up in King County, Valley Medical Center is part of it, have been a fiasco and a disaster, a financial disaster. Just Google them, look up the stories that you've had up there for the last 20, 30 years. Had family members that worked in Valley Medical, but I mean, this is not the place you want to go for healthcare if you need to. It's got all kinds of financial mismanagement and problems historically and structurally just been mismanaged. So I have not seen hospital districts improve the quality of healthcare, or I have seen them increase the costs a lot so that it costs a lot more for you to get anything done. But I haven't seen them benefit the community in the way that they're usually pitched. And remember, all these ideas, park districts, hospital districts, arts districts, even port districts in many cases, they get sold to the community in one way or another. In port districts, some of them get sold to the community because they're trying to prevent a given geographic area from being seized by a neighboring larger port district. If you look, I think there's about six, I should look this up, but there's about 60 port districts, I think, in Washington State. It might be a little off on that. I know I'm somewhere in the ballpark there. But there's a good chunk of those port districts that were created for no other reason than just to be defensive and prevent the tax increases that the community didn't want to have imposed on them by a larger, more rapacious and growing port district nearby. So if you take those port districts out of the mix, they're just taxing entities that get structured despite whatever their selling feature was originally. They just become another way to extract more cash from you and to be unaccountable and to have more, I guess, political power bases for somebody to be elected as elected officials. And that's just one of the challenges that we see with these different districts. Now, in the Park District in I believe the Lacey Park District, I don't know if that proposal involves creating a separate elected body or if it's just setting up a separate transportation. Well, that's the other, or set up a separate taxing district within the city. I noticed in Thurston County when they set up the Transportation Benefit District a while ago, which is a separate taxing entity, pointless, incompetent from the inception, corrupt from the beginning, probably illegal the way they did it. We haven't historically had the brightest of people running Thurston County, and certainly not the most honest, with occasional bursts of good, honest people in there for a while, and then the Democrat machine kind of takes over again. So these districts oftentimes are primarily just future extraction points for tax. So anything to gain taxes, you'll always have some grifter group that comes along And even if the initial crew that sold it to the taxpayers and convinced them there were bluebird butterflies and sunshine going to come out, if they got them done, and then they get in there and they set it up and then it doesn't really go anywhere, there'll be a new group of grifters that come along and recognize the taxing potential and the ability to extract your gravy, out of that gravy train if you can get it going, and they'll take it over and then they'll jack it up, and next thing you know, something that didn't exist on your property tax bill or your sales tax receipts or as a significant, slice of the pie in your county or city budget suddenly starts growing and it starts exploding and it starts getting bigger and they start pushing for more and more. The nature of bureaucracy is always to perpetuate itself. It is the primary justification and reason for bureaucracy to exist. So once it exists only to perpetuate itself. That's the highest priority. After that, everything's just narrative and window dressing to make it seem like there's something useful there. And I think that that's going to be the kind of stuff that you're going to see as problems move ahead. I just would generally, any of those additional districts, especially when you already have that service, whatever it is, and especially in the case of a Parks District, whenever you have that service already being provided technically at that city or county level, it's ridiculous to create a whole new taxing entity. All you're trying to do is create another level of bureaucracy, a greater level of overhead associated with it, and more taxes. And that's essentially all you're doing. And it's an unfortunate thing. I'm having a problem with this particular screen, I think, updating my questions. Let me see if there's some more here. Otherwise, we can go right into some of the conversation. One of the things I wanted to point out, because I think there's a number of people that are oftentimes, even if you're not on this live, you may be logging into this later. And if it's not on a Tuesday evening before 7-ish or so, it'll be later. We finished up the first, I think, dozen, it might be a little more than that, maybe closer to 14 Washington Doge training classes. There's going to be a little bit of consolidation as we get back together. Some people look at some of the expertise that we've collected, especially forensic fraud investigators, former law enforcement, and other people that have had maybe a different, if you're a database guy, some of the skill sets, and trying to coordinate a little bit so we have more of a unified approach to some maybe bigger problems that we have in the state. I anticipate kind of by the end of the summer, we'll be getting on some of these bigger projects. However, there's a lot of people who want to take these kind of classes and get more educated about it or get refreshed on how to file records requests or something else like that. So this is stuff I've been doing for a long time. I'm here to help people. That's my whole crusade and reason for being, is to help more people be engaged and involved. When I say the future belongs to those who show up, I truly believe it. I want you to show up. I want you to feel like you can show up. And I want to take away some of this mystery or the barrier to entry that might exist in your mind or your friend's mind or the other people around you that they've woken up and realized maybe the damage that government's doing or how they're wasting, squandering your future and your money, but they don't necessarily know how to utilize that frustration or desire to get out there and engage, and how to become maybe more efficient and effective in that process. I've made every mistake you can make. I still make some now. So you can learn from the mistakes I've made and from others that I've worked with and be more efficient in your initial path to making things happen and exposing what's happening in government. The video that I'm going to have come out here soon, it's just another example of this, I think tomorrow, on these 3 fraud cases, and how if you had been a citizen living somewhere near there, how you could have gotten these records and identified the fraud before it was ever actually exposed. And I think those are good examples to have for people so that they know that there's a way to do it. Now that we finally got OFM, Office of Financial and Management, to start catching up on their state checkbook information, now we have a lot more stuff that we can start digging through in the last 3 to 4 months worth of budgeting at the state level and individualized expenditures that were probably squandered and wasted, just like many of the ones that we've uncovered in the past. However, people still sometimes, I think, want to have that meeting or that training program or some way of feeling like they've gotten enough information or inspiration to get out there and be engaged and involved. And for that, I'm happy to go out and do these Doge Washington training classes wherever you are. However, just from efficiency's sake, it's easier if somebody can just find a group of people and all come out and do the training for you. So find a group of people, work with me on a date that will work. Give me 3 or 4 different dates, and I can pick one that'll fit in my schedule. Usually weekday nights are good. That limits the scope and the time frame, and usually it fits in easier to people's schedule. Give us a couple hours doing the training, Q&A. I'll stay around afterwards and answer any other questions anybody might have late as you need me to. And I've done this quite a few times in the past. I really like what I see kind of rolling out from it. Now, it's not that I assume, and this is just kind of a practical thing here, I don't assume that every single person who takes one of these classes is going to instantly tomorrow become a highly aggressive and engaged activist filing hundreds of records requests a month. I would find that to be unusual. I don't expect or anticipate that, but some percentage of people will. Others will recognize that their skill set allows them to work with a team, and they are a good piece and an important part of that team, and that team kind of helps you make sure you don't go off the rails and you're just kind of staying focused on the key issues that you're going to be focused on. And but they still feel like they want a little bit more training, or maybe to know that they're not alone and meet some other people at the training class in their area. There's a lot of benefits in doing these types of events. But usually I try to coordinate with a local group so that you already have kind of a baseline of people that are interested in being involved and engaged in this process. So at this point in time, the first 12 to 14 of these classes that I've done, again, it's funny, I can't remember if it's 14 or 12, but it's somewhere in that ballpark. Now, as I'm getting ready to do the next batch of these classes, we're just going to be trying to focus on reaching areas that I may not have been to already, like Clark County or Whatcom County, and several places in King. I mean, we really have to probably do another half dozen training classes all throughout King County, which is where the phenomenal opportunities exist to dig into public records. We really need people in Berrien and Tukwila and Linwood and Shoreline and Issaquah, and a lot of these places, where we can really dig into some financial questionable activities and decisions and start going through and just paying attention to where all that money is going and what they're doing with it. So I think that if you are interested in being engaged and involved in doing that, and you haven't taken one of those classes, see if you can find a local group with you. Could be the Republicans, even though sometimes plenty of times we do expose Republicans for also doing bad things with the finances and government. Or it could just be another group of people locally. Or it could be a Facebook group that you have that you feel is pretty organized, and there's enough of them that are interested and live close enough geographically that we can do it that way. There'll be a number of different ways that we can go out and do this basic training. Now, I'm probably going to start doing some much more tailored and focused training on, and I saw Robert Parker's here. He's one of the best Public Records Act guys in the state. So he's talking about doing a follow-up training out in Kitsap County on much more advanced public records request processes, which I think is really good. I could put on a class for how to find violations under the campaign finance laws and file PDC complaints, what to look for to file ethics complaints against elected officials who are violating Washington State's ethics laws, or even against the executive branch when they're violating the executive ethics rules as well. Also, in structuring and organizing groups to be a little bit more efficient and effective than they currently are. Sometimes people need to think about that a little bit differently than just the way people who jump right in think when they're getting organized. I saw this with the Tea Party. I've seen this in the past with other efforts where you can have very dynamic and capable people who, through the sheer force of their organizational skills and their charisma or whatever it is, they're able to launch an organization or a group and really get it out there going. Like they just get that thing moving fast and hard, and they've done a really good job doing it. And then as they fade away or there's a transition to new leadership, oftentimes you lose that fire or charisma, whatever it is, and those organizations tend to trend line down. There's usually like a cycle in these local groups that come along. The other and that's just something you have to recognize. So if you have somebody who's really good as a leader, part of their job needs to be to find that next leader and to nurture them and to inspire them and to get them going. Because the point of this isn't just our time. It's going to be to hand this off to the next generation, hopefully fixing and cleaning up or structuring things in a way that they have a better shot at making a bigger difference as they move out and start taking the reins of governance and in our local community taking over, that you're preparing them a little bit better to be more assertive and aggressive and aware of the problems that we've already got around us. So I think that that's kind of a big deal, and I think that there's a lot of opportunities that exist out there if we can just get people more organized at a local level so they realize that they can do this, and to train kind of the next people taking over. And you don't have to set up 501c3 or C4 organizations. A lot of times these just work better as loose affiliated clubs, or even just a group of people getting together staying focused on something. They can get a lot more done, and you don't have to waste as much time on paperwork when you don't really need it. Michael Case, you had a question here. Jason Rantz reported that a change that was made by the Washington State Supreme Court that allowed judges to dismiss cases that they felt were unjust. And weren't they already doing this? That's a good question. I heard Jason teasing that a little bit when I was listening to him on the radio, I think yesterday. And I realized that Jason Rantz and Ari Hoffman are at the same time, different stations. I listen to both of them, and I'm friends with both of them. But I was bouncing around, and I heard him talk about this. Jason did, and I was wondering what it was. He was just teasing it so you could hear what he had to say later. The answer is yes, they've frequently dismissed cases that they felt were unjust. To be more clear, they'll dismiss cases that they feel like are politically inconvenient. And the question is, and I have to read the fine print on the recent decision because I'm not actually 100% sure that I know what he's talking about here, but it really depends on how they've worded this. Did they word it in a way that suddenly adds a level of flexibility to the judges so they can kind of expand the scope of justification for why they want to end that lawsuit, or which is really what they're talking about, is ending dismissing cases of some kind. I don't know if it's more tailored towards the public safety side of things, and if they're just trying to orient it so that judges can decide that they don't want to send people to prison just because they went out and killed a bunch of people. It can't possibly be their fault, and they're probably just misunderstood. If that's the attitude and they're opening the door to that, that's a bigger problem. But I'm going to have to go back and read it, and I don't quite know what he's talking about. But it sounds like something I should look into, and I will. Teresa Hancock at We the Governed, GOVR. You're misspelled We the Governed, which is why it's not lighting up there. When are call logs of an elected subject to the OPMA Records Act? Well, okay, so there's a couple different ways you look at this. Call logs have essentially always, if there's a log that shows calls, it's always been, and it's an elected official's public phone for sure, that entire public phone call log is public. Everything about it is. If it's a private phone and they want to know calls that you made using your private phone that were relevant to being an elected official, there's a level of redaction that would be allowed in that process and providing those records and eliminating non-government calls from that call log, if that makes sense. But if there's an argument or a belief that somebody's hiding it, sometimes they'll have what they call an in-camera review, which is essentially the judge looking over your shoulder saying, okay, what are you're not wanting to reveal these calls? What calls are you not wanting to reveal, and why are they not government related on your private phone? So you could potentially go all the way down the road on that and look at it. If what you're trying to look at is call logs for, I mean, I don't know what other scenario you'd really have there. If you got another question related to that, feel free to throw it in down below if I can get to it. But just let me know. Let's see. Chucks and Pearls. Dismissing cases as unjust. I I'm not sure. Sorry, that wasn't really a question here. But judges, somebody up there earlier mentioned that they've already been doing this. Michael Case, I think in his previous question here, he mentioned right here where he's asking, don't they already do this? And the answer is yes. I mean, judges currently do dismiss cases that they feel are unjust. They've been doing that for a long time. The real question is the explanation on why they're doing that. And so I just haven't seen what the current Supreme Court decision that they made. I don't know what they're really saying here. So that's a totally different issue. Mind Blown Watcher, how do we repeal the Growth Management Act? That's a great question. It said GMA, but it stands for Growth Management Act. Repealing the GMA requires either the legislature, it really does require the legislature to essentially repeal it, which they could do. But it's created an edifice around itself that's built up with a massive grifting class of hundreds of millions of dollars that gets distributed among consultants, the planning departments, businesses that profit from consultants. I remember even when you look at simple things like septic systems, we had, it was a Thurston County, I believe it was Thurston County in our health department. Oh gosh, it had to do with the non-scientific approach that they took to requiring X number of pumpings over a certain window of time. I don't remember what the numbers are now. I just remember that in the Scatter Creek watershed where I live, we realized that several of the key players that have been making these decisions on how often septic systems need to be pumped conveniently, and I'm sure this is purely an accident, owned businesses that profited they made money off of pumping septic systems. So of course they're going to get on the board and they're going to say pumping it once every 12 years is industry standard and typical and nothing wrong with that, except that here we're going to say you need to pump it every 2 years. And that theoretically increases substantially the amount of income and profit that I can make in my business. And that's how I get to manipulate government to give me a lot more profit. That's unnecessary. One of the things about that's funny is I've noticed I've been doing these fraud videos, stories, and you'll see comments that come in probably from lefty-leaning sort of folk. And they jump on and they say, well, how come you're doing stories about government, or not government corruption, but they don't like government corruption stories because they believe government's the solution to everything. So obviously you have to know, you can't challenge that narrative. You're really not allowed to talk about how government's corrupt and dishonest and incompetent. So they want to change the narrative and they want to talk only about corporate corruption, which is absolutely a good thing to talk about. What they continually, this is an endless, this goes back to my college days. Every lefty I ever met completely refused to recognize the clear and total problem that exists when a big government occurs and big corporations tend to marry. That line blurs substantially. Most government and most corporate corruption gets made way worse because of its ability to manipulate and control government, and then government blends itself into that corporate decision-making process, and so the corruption becomes this mutually beneficial, corrupt sort of scheme moving forward, and it happens all the time. The Growth Management Act we just talked about right here, which is all these businesses and consultant classes and bureaucrat classes that see the benefit in using the Growth Management Act as a way to feather the nest and ensure that they make tons of money and that they have a guaranteed job income and they can put their kids through college and all these other benefits financially of making sure that that system becomes more complex, more difficult to manage, more confusing for people to comply with. And where you can cut out all your competitors and become a sole provider of whatever resource it is that you're demanding the federal government require the people to pay for. That's where classic corporate corruption comes in. You see it with pharmaceutical companies at the federal level. You see it with defense companies sometimes on the big time, in a lot of different situations. You see it with companies that do salmon habitat recovery plans. In Thurston County, I remember looking at the Thurston Conservation District where the conservation district manager Conveniently, and I'm sure this was totally an accident, before she got hired there, her husband's salmon habitat recovery business had a little bit of business out here. She gets hired, and suddenly it's $20 million for the business going to her husband's business. Corporate corruption requires government to support it. And the worst type of corruption is this merging of the two, which every big government operation tends to facilitate and promote. It's probably less partisan than it is just ideological. If you believe in big government, then you don't mind big corporate or dedicated corporate beneficiaries in this process. And at this point in time, there's no difference between a big corporation like Chevron and a big nonprofit NGO like MoveOn.org or whatever, because all these groups tend to blend together. And FutureWise, that was another group that FutureWise loves the Growth Management Act. Their entire existence is really around destroying property rights, wiping out the future of communities, and an elitist sort of attitude that absolutely ensures that you'll never be able to afford a home for as long as they can exist as an organization. That type of stuff that goes out there really is part of the problem. But you're going to have to get new legislators in there who recognize the damage that the Growth Management Act, central planning schemes in general, really have in the real world. And they ultimately reduce the supply of land. They radically increase the cost of housing by a couple $100,000 per home on average. And they make it very unpredictable sometimes on ridiculous zoning choices, where you'll see they take away the zoning choices for communities, that they may get together and say, listen, we want this to be a single family home sort of community here. And the Growth Management Act will come in and force them to put, rack and stack public housing kind of right next to those houses, right where they don't want it. So it's kind of an amazing situation that you'll find yourself in when you actually study and understand what the Growth Management Act does. The funny thing about it, there's nothing new or unique about the Growth Management Act other than the breadth and scope of the bureaucracy. If you go back and you read, I remember reading about the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. You had the Bolsheviks and you had the Mensheviks. And the Mensheviks were only different from the Bolsheviks in the sense that they were more focused on kind of this land planning. They had like this utopian scheme for what a city should look like. The funny thing is that it hasn't changed in 100 years. It's almost the same exact design that your central planners that work in any given county or city or state, what their ideas are. And it really comes out of the centralized planning scheme of this is how we're going to design a perfect city, and this is where we're going to put farming, and this is how we're going to do public transportation, and big swaths of wilderness in between. They really have a structure that they design and set up. And the impulsive desire to kind of rapaciously control every aspect of somebody's life moving forward. It's just a key part of what a central planner is. And it doesn't matter what their title is, but their attitude when they get into the planning department, and you see it all the time, is absurd and ridiculous. And the net benefit, of course, to us as a community is not good. It increases the cost of living, it increases the cost of housing, reduces the supply, it increases the likelihood of squatter camps. They love super expensive, subsidized housing that's way more expensive than private housing, and they love that because they can dump an endless cash pile into something that will never solve the problem and only makes it worse, which is really one of the goals of bureaucracy. It's about just keeping things rolling forward. John Jacobson just filled out my ballot. It's excruciating hell voting for moderate Democrats rather than solid conservatives. Yes, it is, but my guess is, depending on where you live, that may be the only choice you have on the ballot. One of the challenges with people who are more of a conservative, libertarian, maybe oriented, smaller government sort of attitude is because they don't trust government. They tend not to like government as much, and they don't believe government's the solution to all the world's problems, and they don't see it as a path to power or control the way that the left instinctively does. It's kind of their religion. It means that you're going to have fewer people who want less government willing to run to manage or at least reduce the abuse of existing government. So usually the worst people we can find in the community are the ones who run for government. Or what you'll do is you'll get more eccentric, unserious people that may be conservative and liberty-oriented. You would agree with them on the policy basis, but their background is so unimpressive that it's very likely that nobody wants to vote for them, and they don't raise a single penny, and they don't run a serious campaign, and yeah, they're good, but they can't get out of that election cycle doom loop. And so that's one of the issues. So anyway, we'll see how it goes. Here's a question. D.L. Williams, any feedback about Washington State Governor talking live today on Watch Live Now, Fox this morning, before Trump's live speech, and his response? I didn't see it, so I'm assuming you mean Ferguson going there and trying to preempt Trump on something. That'd be fascinating. I'd like to see it. I'm sure there'll be some articles and commentary about it. And it wouldn't be a bad idea. I should probably do one of these. I've wanted to do this for a while, where I basically play a politician's speech. Ferguson's notorious for this. Nick Brown, the AG, would probably be good on this. Lori Jenkins, some of these other in the political class of Washington, have them, play a video and then pause it and interpret what they just said, because they oftentimes make these very predictable presentations and speech where they're really saying something that's substantially different than the words that they're actually using, and you can really almost predict it. I swear to God, these guys go to a school where they're told the same weasel words and kind of the same approach from how they go here. So anyway, Mind Blown Watcher, have you heard from the Energy Siting Council, I'm assuming, and Department of Ecology? On June 30th, we released final programmatic EISs, environmental impact statements, for 3 types of clean energy facilities: wind, solar, and green hydrogen production. I did not hear that. I was aware that there was something like that coming out. I thought they were also doing a nuclear, clean nuclear or modern nuclear version as well. But the one thing to remember is that if you're a central planner, especially and you work for a Department of Ecology, the highest priority you have is certainly not cleaning up the environment. In fact, that's probably the worst thing you could have, because it's not job security. That is the potential to take away your job and your career path that you've chosen. You don't want the environment clean at all. That's actually why when I did that story a while ago about the Department of Ecology, and they had the garbage piles piling up around their property because they let homeless drug addicts just flood the zone right around the Department of Ecology. They had open pit latrines. They were burning garbage. They were dumping oil into the salmon stream and battery acid into the ground. Not a single person in the Department of Ecology, not one living soul, not a single employee that worked there did anything about it. They could actually look out their windows and see this every day. They didn't care. They just don't care. They do not care about cleaning up the environment at all. They absolutely love the opportunity to come in and destroy a farmer somewhere. They love the opportunity of making your house an extra $150,000 more than it should be. They love the opportunity to find excuses to increase taxes and bloat their agencies and hire consultants and organize grifting operations for when they quote unquote retire or for their family members. That they love, but they don't care about cleaning up the environment at all. They won't even do it when it's right in front of their faces. That's pretty amazing. Let's see. Mind Blown Watcher, there's always so much tomfoolery going on in this state. It is impossible to keep up as one person. That is true, which is why you want to organize teams of people and divide and conquer. You focus on different things, and you don't always have to be on the same page, but generally you stay focused on the general movement towards liberty and freedom, hopefully, and it requires a lot of us to be engaged and involved to get there. Educated Gypsy, what is EIS? That's an environmental impact statement. I think I answered that earlier, but I'll repeat that right now. Please don't ever stop doing it. Okay, well, thank you. That's nice. Nice commentary. D.L. Williams, I apologize. I'm 63 years old. I'm new at this, but I watch you all the time. Believe you are a lone hero, a voice in the uncertainty. Well, thank you. And you guys are being super nice, and you're going to make me blush here. So I don't know what to say to that. I'm just going to keep moving on. Let's see. Graphics Guru, Glenn, when is Trump going to put an end to chemtrails in the USA skies? He's never mentioned it once in his first term or second term. Actually, that I don't know if he has or not, but there were some things in one of the departments I saw out here about eliminating doing any kind of aerosol weather modification stuff. I saw there was something there. Sorry, it wasn't top of mind, but I did come across something that was out there. And mind-blown watcher, and yet we still don't have emissions data to show how the CCA works, which is the Climate Commitment Act. And yeah, this is a complete scam, as many of you probably watch the show regularly, but if you don't, the CCA, the Climate Commitment Act, is just one big grifting scam that was structured under a carbon credits auction scheme piled on the wholesale costs of fuel so that cash could be pile into this little gravy train operation that the politicians get to pick winners and losers, mostly their friends who are going to be winners or future job prospects for themselves. And they send out billions of dollars to entities supposedly under the guise of the Climate Commitment Act, making the world a greener and safer place in the future. But of course, none of them track any of the progress on it. Nobody really cares. They aren't measuring CO2 emissions. It's just one big opportunity to steal billions of dollars. You're paying for it with your fuel costs. It doesn't hurt the big oil companies. They just jack up the costs of what they charge the gas stations. And Bob Ferguson went after the public utilities to make sure that they don't, make sure they are not transparent on the increasing costs that this stupid and ridiculously corrupt law imposes on your public utilities as well. So you're paying more for that. Anyway, so that's interesting. And yeah, the emissions data. I mean, it's just one big scam. And nobody even really pretends it's not a scam. Everyone knows it's a scam. Even the people that voted for it, they know it's a scam. Everyone knows it's a scam. And they just kind of wink and nod and look the other way, and they steal a few more $1 million and have a nice day. That is how government works. That's how the grifting class around it works. And the only way you're going to change that is radically downsizing the state. There is no other way. Checks and pearls. Rant continues. Washington ranks 10th highest in the nation for the most missing children. And I'm just saying. I don't know if that's true, but if it is, you should cite your source on that, because I would be interested in knowing what that is. I do think that Washington State, because of its geography, would be a logical transit zone for drugs and for human trafficking and for illegal immigration. Just logical. We have one of the greatest ports, deep water ports in the world. We have a mild climate, particularly on the west side of the state, with ample rain. We have a substantial amount of stability in our power grid because of the hydropower options that we're using. We have a lot of geographic and environmental benefits of living here that have been recognized for a long, long time. And manipulating, it wouldn't surprise me if you would see things like child trafficking or human trafficking being added to the negatives, taking advantage of the fact of our key geographic location here. Thunder Designer saying, will Colbert run for president now that his echo chamber show is canceled? I don't know. Don't care. I never watched him. I don't know anybody really that did. And, you know, the name of the game there on that kind of situation is that it was really an expensive show. I didn't pay much attention to him before, but when you spend a lot more money than you bring in outside of government, usually that creates a deficit that gets large enough at a certain point in time that they just can't sustain the operation moving forward. You can run a private sector business at a loss for a long time before you decide to close up shop. But the inevitable reality of not making a profit is that you're done, and you will close and you'll be done and over, and that's it. So working for a profitable outcome is a logical and moral solution to any kind of enterprise that you decide to go down the road and operate. Like I said, outside of government, which loses money every opportunity. So I think that Colbert losing too much money on his show and just losing a lot of viewership and profitability dropping off, some of which probably didn't have a lot to do with his show content, but the general collapse in advertising on more traditional media anyway. This was inevitable, whether it happened now or some other time. They could keep losing more money and running his show, but that's it. Listen, if he's so awesome, he should go out there and set up his own program, become a podcaster like everyone else, and he can probably do it a lot cheaper and may even be able to make a profit doing that. If you remember Tucker Carlson, I mean, essentially he got canned, and you saw him go out and launch his own show, and he seems to be doing just fine. And I don't care if you like Tucker or not. It's just, if you have the ability to go out and run a more efficient operation on your own, that you have an audience for it, go for it. You should do it. Let's see. Graphics Guru, did you hear that Trump is arresting Obama for treason? I'm assuming you meant TREASON. And arresting with 2 R's instead of 3. But I mean, there's those rumors out there. Mainly, this is just because Gabby Gifford, obviously, the DNI Department they put out that list of, and referred it to the Department of Justice, right, which is the collusion between Barack Obama and several of the senior intelligent heads, the politicized bureaucracy there, and trying to invent the Russian collusion hoax that they knew was just a fake Hillary Clinton dossier kind of funneled through our own Washington State's law firm here, Perkins Coie, and take something that was just a fake hit piece and trying to turn it into something real in order to bring down the Trump administration. That was a marginally competent but amazingly effective way of wasting vast amounts of time and energy and distraction. There's actually some lessons to be learned there too on how to that government can be just incredibly easy to hijack and corrupt if you have the right people in there to do it. Tulsi Gabbard, that's one. Yeah, Tulsi. Gabbard's the one who got shot. That's right. For some reason, I keep blurring those two names together, those two elected officials. Let's see. D.L. Williams, have you seen footage of Trump and Epstein? Well, I mean, I haven't gone through the archives to look through it, but I mean, I've seen pictures of Epstein with almost everybody in elected office, and I do think it is, I mean, you got this scummy guy that clearly was a fraudster and a scam artist. I absolutely don't believe he didn't have some kind of a target list. Whether it's a client list or whatever they're going to, whatever the Epstein list really looks like, if it's not been totally censored and removed or given to somebody else for future blackmail opportunities, you can't convince me he didn't have something. I mean, this guy was dirty and scummy in many, many ways. So, but there's no scenario where if Trump was truly compromised with Epstein, that information wouldn't have come out during the Biden administration, especially with the thousands of just raving, mouth-foaming, crazy people in high positions of political power who had access and would have been able to get access to some of the original data and the original stuff from Epstein Island and from everywhere else, from his apartment in New York and stuff. They would have loved to have blown this up on Trump. And the fact that they didn't do it just indicates to me they probably don't have that. But the question is, what else do they have? And that is the one that we need to dig into. Steve, you got a funny question here, and I think this is funny here. Steve Leach, what are the odds of Alberta becoming the 51st state and Saskatchewan becoming the 52nd state? The funny thing is, it's not as far-fetched as people think. And part of the reason for that is the structure of the Canadian Federation, right? 1867, that's when Canada became kind of, it officially really wasn't then a colony as much of England anymore and became part of the Commonwealth, but they created the Canadian Confederation in 1867. So each of the provinces in Canada function like a state government does in Washington. The difference in Canadian government structure is they are even more bloated with bureaucracy and politicians on a per capita basis than we are in America. And that's not a good thing, that's a bad thing. And it just means that they're less efficient and they spend a lot more money in taxes for a lot less value. But the cultural background on Alberta and Saskatchewan, and really it's true for rural BC and probably the territories up above, Yukon Territories area as well. That cultural element of Canada is much more closely aligned to America than it is to Quebec, for example, or Toronto. And so, and there's financial integration with America too, mostly on the mining and the energy, to some extent wood products, but really mining and energy are probably the big ones. And there's a lot, and some manufacturing, but mostly those. And these are relatively unpopulated, low population parts of Canada. What's weird about it, though, is that let's just presume that these two, whatever the legal steps that they would have to go through in the Articles of Confederation, I don't think they call it Articles of Confederation in Canada, but whatever their Confederation arrangement was, their ability to get out of it is probably, I don't know what that legal process would be, but there might be a process, there probably is a process that they could go down and leave Canada and become part of the U.S. That would be earth-shattering in a lot of ways. It would make America a much stronger country, and it would make Canada a much weaker country. And if that happened, I would be cheering that on, really, because I think both those provinces have a massive amount of natural resources to offer America. Now, the more interesting thing that's kind of related to that would be the Yukon territories and kind of those northern territories that would come potentially as well, or at least they could be they wouldn't be isolated from America, because now you'd have this land bridge essentially through Alberta and Saskatchewan. And could they become part of America as well? And then you'd have this ability to go all the way from Canada down to America without Alaska all the way down through America without ever having to go through Canada. You'd have this isolated British Columbia, I guess, out here on its own. And then you would have the eastern Canada on the other side. And I've always thought that British Columbia was much more culturally aligned with the U.S. than the eastern side of Canada in particular. But it's pie in the sky, so I don't know. We'll see what's going on. With all due, so this is a graphics guru. With all due respect to Martin Luther King, MLK is Martin Luther King. Epstein is just so much more important and relevant at the current juncture. And you're asking me if he is, and I think that that's probably true. Epstein's going to be more politically relevant to the existing class of people around today. Martin Luther King was assassinated long ago, and the attention and drama from the 60s and early 70s, I mean, that kind of is, it's mostly before I was born. And so and obviously a lot of the MLK files were just released, huge, like 200 and some odd thousand pages. I haven't really read anything people talking about. I haven't really read anything about talking about the MLK files as far as what was revealed. It was interesting that his family didn't want them revealed, which I thought was odd, but I don't know why, and I don't know what they really show at this point in time. Mostly at this point in time, it's just about getting history right, I guess, and seeing what we have, and maybe that ends up rewriting some of the books about MLK, or at least elements of his life that people were less aware of. And you're talking about somebody who in American history is pretty famous. Epstein is just a slimy, nasty operation that there's just no redeeming quality with this guy. And whatever it was that he was doing was so weird and nasty. It does, to me, it boggles the mind that you could presume that he would, like, if what he was doing was no big deal, why'd he commit suicide, right? Commit suicide. Also, why would he be bothering to do all this stuff? And there's a lot of ways to grift money and to get cash, and he seemed to have that under control. Why would he be doing such weird stuff in the way that he was doing it, with either his apartment in New York or that island or however he was doing all this, the New Mexico ranch, with these genuine, like, well-known business titans, Prince Andrew, right? Was it? I think it was whatever it was, the British royal family. You could see him tying into all these people and really making a point of being part of, somehow being seen with them. It reminds me of some kind of groupie that you would see. And despite the fact the guy has no background and he was a mediocre professor somewhere, that suddenly rises to the level of being this big financier suddenly. And I think he just managed to get the utilize those resources that he had, blackmailing, or perhaps he did work for an intelligence agency, which could be one of the reasons why there's so much sensitivity around this guy. Or he was cooperating with him. Maybe he didn't actually work with him, but he was utilizing that as a way to protect his relationship until he couldn't be protected anymore. I don't know. But we'll see how it goes. Hi, Glenn. Let me jump onto this one here, the next one. John Ross here, former Seattle radio broadcaster. Recall how we all voted for $30 car tabs, and then the cabal via a Seattle pettifogger shyster decided that the Iman initiative was or at least decided unconstitutional. Yes, I was actually in the courtroom, by the way, during those first few hearings. I went down to Seattle. I remember I was there when Tim was there, took photos of him, wrote some articles about it at the time. And the second part of this, I think, is really where you're getting to a question here. Unconstitutional, what are your thoughts on our most basic right, civil disobedience of refusing the pricey tabs until they reinstate $30 car tabs? I think it's great, more power to you. And by the way, this is actually personally more impactful for people who live in the King County, especially the Sound Transit area, where they really, really jack up your car tabs with everything in the kitchen sink thrown on. There's a number of people up there who live in that area, down into Pierce, I think, too. Then I've talked to them, and they said, listen, they've run the math on it. Even if they're pulled over periodically and get a ticket for not having the car tabs current, it's still less money than they would spend on the car tabs. So economically, it's just a logical thing not to pay for car tabs. So my guess is that a lot of people are simply doing it for the economics. They can say it's a protest. My guess is most people do it for just the economics. The protest is certainly another legitimate reason for doing it. But anyway, so we'll see what, I so want to get back to $30 car tabs, and we'll see what happens with that. Let's see. I'm getting to some last couple questions here because I am getting pressed for time here. D.L. Williams, question: do you think the cost of the Golden Dome put our country in a recession? So you mean, would the cost of that Golden Dome put our country in a recession? Don't know. I know it's expensive. I haven't really seen solid numbers on what that is. For those of you who don't know, the Golden Dome is supposed to be this idea. I hate these dumb names for this stuff, but it's this idea of a missile and drone ballistic defense kind of system that would stop potential attacks via drones or missiles like what we see happening in Ukraine or Russia and the Middle East, and kind of an integrated type system similar to what Israel probably has next to the Gaza and the historic Hezbollah/Houthi/Iran attacks on that country. And so trying to come up with something. It would have to be incredibly complex in America because of the sheer volume and size of our country. And so I don't really know for sure what this actually looks like, but we will see. Jason Fisher, when is the Vancouver mayor election, and is anyone running against the current pro-homeless one? That's a good question. I don't know. The city elections are usually on off-year elections, which means right now and 2 years from now. So you would have 2025 and 2027. Those would be the two windows of time. I don't know which one he is. I'd have to look that up. Doge Sound Transit, yeah, you bet. Sound Transit is thoroughly and comprehensively corrupt to its core. I mean, it's like it's Washington State's version of the California train to nowhere. They just do have a train. It just costs 3 times as much, and it's decades late. So and costs, of course, way more than anybody ever would have projected. Nobody rides it except for the drug addicts. Let's see, the Thunder Designer. Some believe that releasing the Epstein files could potentially put Trump at risk. It's just a theory as to why they may not have been released yet. Yeah, I'm sure some people think that, but I doubt that's as much as significant. I mean, who spent the most time with him? I mean, you have Bill Gates clearly spent a lot of time with him. There's other billionaires who clearly spent a lot more time with him than they ever should have. That J.P. Morgan guy who lost that case, or they settled it down in the Virgin Islands. So I mean, come on, there's some major players out there, more significant financially than Trump. Maybe not politically right now, but they've been politically heavyweights in the past. They're tied in a lot more. Clinton certainly is. So anyway, we'll see. Graphics Guru, would you give Obama to Russia to stand trial? And the answer to that is no, I would not. I wouldn't hand over an American to Russia to stand trial over there. I don't think that's a good thing, especially a former president. Just no way. I just would not do that. Jason Fisher, is Washington State University still losing students and money? And last I checked, it is. And it's their own fault. So they can look in the mirror. mostly it's their own fault. There's also just the reality for people who have been tracking the cost of education. It is so absurd and so ridiculous, it's become a parody of itself to some extent. When you look at the amount of debt and just having kids that are good and ready to go to college, either graduating, going to college, or already in that path, the shocking amount of debt that I refuse to let my kids get into, but that a lot of people seem to think is an acceptable path for higher education degree is ridiculous and sad, because that's a difficult way to start out life, substantially in debt that way for a degree, especially if you took a dumb degree like queer studies or women's studies or some useless degree like that, that it actually will have no value for you in life at all, other than some virtue signaling indication that you squandered 4 years partying too hard and writing whatever your chat GPT essays were. I can't imagine that as these costs have escalated, and the truth is there are thousands of universities and colleges in America that you can choose from. I think there's a general recognition that it is irrational and not worth going into debt hundreds of thousands of dollars, or even, a substantial amount of money, and maybe not even 100,000. It's still, I don't think it's worth it. You should be able to get educated on the skills that you need for whatever job you're going to get, and probably make more money and do better than whatever this college degree artificial requirement would feel like. Now, there's people that want to go to college for specific reasons. I totally understand that. Going into debt is insane, the way that they want you to do that. And what makes it ridiculous is that the university systems, public or private, have tended to kind of collaborate and bloat themselves. Look at their administrative costs at these universities and how much they spend their money on dumb stuff that you're subsidizing, with your student, your kid, going into debt for life, or for a good chunk of their adult life, to subsidize a bunch of 6- and 7-figure employees working in these universities, doing nothing that matters at all to education at all. And so what the heck, But anyway, that is not the path that I would go. Yeah, I love the dumb names. I appreciate it. They're over the top, on brand with MAGA. Yeah, perhaps. But someday down the road, you still have to deal with this stuff. Big, beautiful bill. I think that was a dumb name. The Golden Dome, I think that's a dumb name too. It is funny, but, and I know it obviously triggers the left, and so they have meltdowns over it. But, I would just, it might be it's the wonkish side of me that comes out, and I want to have it be a little bit more serious when you're trying to do serious things. All right, guys, there's just a lot of other, I'm going to probably just start closing the show down today. I've been doing this for about an hour and 45 minutes. Thank you guys so much for watching today. I hope this was helpful. It's summer. I'm always amazed that you guys are willing to put the kind of time to watch the show. More significantly, there's usually about 1,500 people that come and watch it after the fact. As much as I do live streams once a week, I'm not a big live stream watcher myself, so I can't appreciate the reason why you would actually want to watch me talk about these subjects or ask questions about them. But my preference is actually do this stuff live and in public. I like that even better. But I've had so much feedback from people, many of you watching now, and probably people who will watch later. I've had so much positive feedback about these that I've really built it into part of the program that I'm going to do every week for as long as I can keep doing these, maybe more often. So let me know what you think about the show, what things you'd like to change, what topics you'd want to have me be coming to the show more prepared in advance to talk about. There's all kinds of options like that we could have in the future. And I do have what I believe to be a fairly big story that I'll be running out with next week. I don't want to give you any heads up on it just in case I get delayed for some technical reasons, but I've been working a lot on a number of different stories, and one of them I think is going to be fairly big and pretty impactful. So I absolutely hope that you come away from watching my show and other shows with the objective and goal that you want to be involved in helping hold government accountable yourself. and also to spread the word. I don't know if I'm always the optimal messenger for this, but when you find people who communicate effectively and accurately and well about the issues that are going on in the state and our community, please help us by spreading the word to other people. I have a lot of people I'm obviously, I travel around the state a lot. I put about 40,000 miles a year just driving around Washington state. That means I go to gas stations and restaurants and events and grocery stores, whatever. And I run into the people in the public all the time. It's rare that I have a week go by that I don't have 2 or 3 people approach me in public that I've never met before, thanking me for the show or let me know they watched the show. And I think these are people oftentimes who have they're probably not going to come to a Republican meeting. They're probably not going to be involved in the more wonkish and traditional sort of political stuff that many of us have done in the past. But I feel like I'm having a positive impact on them. I appreciate if you're watching this and you see me in the public, feel free to come up and say hi. I usually don't bite anybody's head off, and I'm actually always feel pretty flattered that people even notice me, especially when I'm looking scruffy and I've come off the mower or the tractor or something, or I've been working in the woods and I get sawdust all over me. It always surprises me that people even recognize me when I'm looking like that in public. But come up and say hi. The person you see giving this program, that is me. I don't try to put on any airs. So anyway, I hope that you guys have a good day. Enjoy the week. I know I'm going to be out in, I can't remember if I think I'm in Enumclaw this weekend. I'm going to watch a Scottish Highland dance competition there, so I'm excited to be out there for that, and hope all is well. So I hope you guys have a good time and enjoy the next video. I'll either be launching it today or tomorrow. And just remember, the future belongs to those who show up, so please keep getting out there and showing up. We got a lot of work to do to save our state and to fix our communities here. So thank you so much.